My name's Brian Murphy. This is my presentation about how culture is better than YAML. And I have a ton of caveats before I kick off this entire presentation because I wrote these slides before I knew that there was a whole culture track. So there's some like intro stuff about culture blowing through that. Like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Everyone today has been talking about culture and they've been doing such an amazing job. I'm like a little nervous to go after all of them because it's been going so well. The second caveat is I'm having sort of a P2 emergency myself. My mobile phone blew up this morning. I've lost access to MFA. I'm in a weird country where they speak a weird language. It's all very nerve-wracking for me. So please, as an SRE, send your empathy my way. Good vibes, positive, all those kind of things. So yeah, Brian Murphy, here we go. Here's a definition of culture. We've talked about it a lot today. Our focus is on, or the focus for this talk will be around you, your workspace, your workmates, how you work together, all of that kind of stuff. One word I haven't heard come up hardly at all is sociotechnical. And so what I'm going to talk about is like sociotechnical problems. And that's like the interrelatedness of, hardware, software, and humans, right? It's that whole human-computer interaction, HCI, it's all that kind of stuff. So we'll be talking a lot about sociotechnical issues. Yeah, like I said, this slide I wrote before I knew there was a culture. So, dude, where's my architecture diagram, code, PromQL? It's not in this presentation. Spoiler alert. This talk isn't about shiny services, YAML. I swear to God, there is no YAML in this presentation. You do not have to look at a wall of text. What this talk is about is engineering culture. And actually, it's not about engineering culture. It's about organizational culture. Because culture in your group, in your space, is bigger than just engineering. Like think about all the times that you work with finance or HR or I'll give examples of this later too from my personal life about how things go. Also, if you didn't notice, I'm an American. I walk around a lot. I use my hands a lot. If you have questions, it's a small group, shout it out. I'll do my best to repeat the question and we'll keep moving. So yeah, please go for it. So yeah, it's about organizational culture. And it's about how bad culture is worse than YAML, bad architecture, bad Ansible runbooks. It's worse than all of those things. You might say that there's a caveat between bad culture and bad architecture, Conway's Law and all that. Maybe we'll dive into that a little bit. But this talk's going to be a little wild style because of where we've come. So the other spoiler is that socio-technical problems aren't glamorous. Like we've heard a lot of people say it already, right? Like these problems aren't sexy. Like it's not cool. You don't wake up the next day after solving one of these problems and everyone puts you up on their shoulder and parades you around and, slaps you on the back and high fives. And they're just not sexy. But guess what? Like these are the problems that we desperately need to solve within our organizations. These are the things that are holding us back. These are the things that are holding us down. So let's attempt to solve them. So like I said, who am I? My name is Brian Murphy. I work for Dell Technologies. We do more than laptops and screens. We do all sorts of great stuff. Big boxes, all sorts of cool stuff. Shout out to Dell for sending me here. Good times. And because everybody's been showing pictures of their dogs, I threw in this picture of my dog. It's interesting. This is a fort in New York, somewhere near the Vermont border, that has a French and British bunkers and then American bunkers. And it's just a very interesting area, but that's my dog. Her name's Lolo. She's pretty great. So now you're all thinking like, dude, who is this guy? What is he talking about? So I said there wasn't going to be any YAML, but I am going to give you some data. And so what we have here is a timeline on the bottom. Those are years. And then on the y-axis is the amount of time I spent doing YAML or code versus the amount of time that I started doing culture and process. And the short dotted line is time spent doing YAML, and the long dashed line is the time spent doing culture. So I started in 2016 as an SRE. I was working for a startup. We were having not dumpster fires, but problems, right? And so we needed something different, something new. We needed a different energy. So I became the first SRE. I have a whole talk about that. It's really good. Here I am bragging about it, but it's well worth checking out. And I spent a lot of time doing Ansible runbooks, on call, all sorts of good stuff right there. Very little time on process. And then I became a manager, right? Because the problems that we were having wasn't big enough for one person. So we had to expand. We had to add more people. And I started spending my time getting them up to speed and making sure that they had the thought process and the mindset in place and all of that. And then I had a eureka moment. And around this time, I moved jobs. I moved halfway across the world and started doing something else entirely. And I realized that everyone on my team was a million times better engineer than I was, right? They looked SRE circles around me. And I had this whole feeling of this imposter syndrome, like, what am I doing here? How am I managing all these smart people? They are way better than me. Like, they could out-YAML the crap out of me. But that was my eureka moment, because I was like, right, my superpower is not YAML, right? My superpower is not Ansible runbooks. My superpower is unblocking them. It's making them better. It's 10xing the organization. It's going out to groups like this, having these conversations, hopefully impressing upon people some, those sparks that sends them back to their organizations and makes them better. And so you could see there's a huge pivot in like how much time I spend doing YAML and how much time I spend fixing processes or introducing processes. And then, a couple of job changes, SRE architect, way less YAML. And then now I'm this technical staff SRE. And you could see there's barely any, there's barely any coding. This is sort of what I do all day long. I go out, I reach across the organization, right? It's rather than just my team of 6 people, I'm now talking to 600 people, I work for Dell, and there's over 100,000 of us. So I talk to quite a lot of people all the time. And so what have I learned, right? Like I just showed you this cool graph, and we all love numbers and things like that. So what have I learned? So over this period, what I've learned is that SRE is a job title, and everyone can be an SRE, and that's cool. But it's also a mindset. Just like DevOps, platform engineering, like all of those things, that mindset that you need to bring to solve those problems is what you need to be talking about. It's the things that you need to be doing and impressing upon others is this mindset. And there's a couple things that you really need to focus on, right? It's not focusing on better YAML, right? Because better YAML is like a quick fix for the most part. It's these big concepts, right? It's like telling people, proactive is better than reactive, right? It's that whole mindset around observability. Like, get out in front of the problem before, the customer sees an issue. Like, be that proactive thing. It's raising up SLOs and error budgets. It's talking about blameless postmortems. I mean, you've heard it earlier today. You'll probably hear it more today. Blameless, do that. And toil reduction, right? Like, these are the concepts that you want to impress upon others. And you'll notice none of these, right? I guess some could be YAML, but, but it's the concepts, right? It's the concepts. And this was my superpower, these concepts. And then you're thinking to yourself, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I go back to my organization, and how do I do this? And what I always say is, like, be a champion, right? Be the champion. And it's not like, FA Cup champion. It's more like the cheerleading kind of champion, right? So how do you do that? For me, it's pretty easy because I love talking to people and I love going out and I love reaching outside of my comfort zone and I love doing things like this, right? Talking to strangers about SRE. And I can say the word awesome because I'm an American and it's cool. But the whole point is to be enthusiastic, right? Like, you have to really sell some of this. You have to be a salesperson. You have to go to your organization, and sometimes we work for little organizations and it's easier or more difficult. Sometimes we work for large organizations and it's harder to move that, to move it. But what you can do is you can cheerlead these concepts, right? You can promote these things amongst your organization. You could show the benefits. You could do all these things. But always, you got to follow closely with data, right? So whether it's blog posts, books, numbers, anything that you can show helps prove your case, right? You could take it to those skeptical engineers and you can say things like, but look, this is a proven track record. It does all these things. And finally, as SREs, this, but listen, right? Because you could be pushing something with all your might because you think it's the biggest problem. And some other manager is going to be like, listen, like, observability is cool. We have no issues with observability. You could stop talking about that. What we really have is this, whatever, Jira back queue problem or Jira backlog problem or these other things. And this is the thing that we need you to back and push forward. So you got to listen because you got to know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Yeah, and that's it, right? Cool. No, just kidding. That's not it. That would be a terrible way to leave you, and I would apologize for that. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the experiences that I've had in the last few years being an SRE, and hopefully give you at least examples so you can be like, oh man, yeah, that's happened to me. Oh, this is how I could attack it differently next time, or this is how I could promote it within my group. Things of that nature. So here's an example, Dora Metrics. I'm going to pretend everyone knows what Dora Metrics is because Dora Metrics is a whole presentation unto itself. But essentially, it boils down to 4 things, right? There's 4 things that you should be tracking. It's deployment frequency, lead time for changes, change rate failure, and time to restore services. And these are, what Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble and all the people over at Dora said, these are the important things that you need to track. And if the person from Linear B was here, he would be applauding right now and he would agree. And so that's a lot, right? Like, if you're a startup, that's a lot to track. And maybe you don't know how, or maybe you can't. But I would suggest focusing on some of them or one of them, right? So we had a problem when I was at this startup that had some dumpster fires. And we were pushing out changes super fast. Like, we kept pushing out changes and we kept breaking things. We just broke things over and over again. And sales loved it because we were pushing out new features and they could tout, oh, here's all this great stuff. But our customers started to be not a fan because our reliability was going way down. And we could go to, PMs and we could go to executives and say, hey, we got to slow down. We got to change what we're doing. We're breaking stuff too much. We have to bring the reliability up. But we could only come with our guts because we weren't tracking these metrics. And so we couldn't impress upon them exactly how bad the problem was. So once we started tracking these numbers, our change failure rate, right? We could actually go to them and be like, this is how bad it really is. This is how bad. And that was like their eureka moment. Besides the support tickets and all those things coming in. Here's another example, on-call. So when I was at this fictional, no, that's all right. It's cool. You got to find directions. It's all good. We all are finding direction in life, right? Like, it's all good. I told you, like, I'm wild styling this, so we're good here. So when I was at this startup, let's pretend it's a fictional startup. When I was at this startup, I don't know if any of you have ever worked for a startup, but if you're like under 30 engineers, under 30 people, everyone is so committed, right? Like, everyone is just like bought in. They've drank the Kool-Aid. They're super psyched to be there and they want to do anything. Anytime an incident happens, it's all hands on deck. Everyone drops what they're doing and they fix the problem because they want it to come back to life. I almost got emotional there. And so that meant that everybody was essentially on call 24/7, every day, all day, on the weekends, on holidays, just all the time. And like, you've seen the slides, right? The hero, like the SRE hero, like everyone in the org becomes that person. We had no on-call rota. Like, it didn't exist for us. And everybody was burning out. It was insanity. And so we developed, right? Like, I helped develop an on-call rota, and we brought people on board, and we put in alerts that had run books, and we stopped having those single points of failures. We stopped having those superheroes because each alert had a run book associated with it. We made sure that everything was up to date, and it made for a better experience for everyone. And then it actually allowed us to move faster, because rather than everyone focusing on incidents, you have one person go off and do the, focus on the incident, and everybody else can do the project work. We also had the problem where people would fix things without us knowing it. So you'd be in the middle of an incident, and all of a sudden things would start working again, and you'd turn to the other person and you'd be like, "Did you do that?" And they'd be like, "No, did you do that?" And I'd be like, "No." And you'd be like, "What happened? Like, how did we fix this?" And then we would spend a bunch more time trying to figure out what happened. And it turned out, the SRE superhero fixed it behind our backs, but didn't tell us because they had to go on to the next problem. And so by bringing some of that together, and by making that on-call and making it a real, by making it real, we allowed ourselves to move faster, which seems counterintuitive, but yeah, that's how it worked. And so incident management training, right? I can see everyone. I can see all of you back there being like, "Good God, incident management training is the worst. Like, this is the worst thing ever." But it's not. I'm telling you, it is not. And it's a very important thing to have. So I worked at an organization where, again, it was a different fictional organization, but I worked at an organization where they had an incident management process. And I was like, cool, this is great. This is so awesome. And they had training, and they had all of this other stuff. But then there was they never did the training, and then when I actually went and reviewed the incident process, the incident response process, it had like line items that said, "Go talk to this person," and I was like, oh, "These guys know what I'm talking about." I was like, "This person hasn't worked in the company for 3 years. Like, this process is broken." And so even if you brought someone new on board and they followed the documentation word for word, they're totally bonked, right? Like, they're not getting their job done. And so doing incident management training is super important, especially refreshers, and especially for brand new folks, because I don't know if you all remember the first time you went on call. If you went on call without any training, you're lost. Right? You're absolutely lost. You don't know where you are. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what any of that means. It's like, incident commander. Like, what is that? Also, I worked at a group where they didn't call it the incident commander. They called it something else. And I was like, what is this role? I don't understand what this role is, until I read and updated and modernized and stuff like that, and dealt with the documents. But like, you remember the first time you were on call, someone say hello. Exactly. Robin, say hello. Yeah, exactly. So if you're not trained, like, if someone doesn't say, don't just randomly call it out. It's like when you're doing CPR, you don't turn and say, "Someone call 999 or 911. You have to say, "Joey, go call 911, right? Like, you have to express, you have to get that point across and say, "Please, you individual, go and do this thing." Otherwise, your SRE superhero does CPR and the patient comes back to life and you don't know why. So, and I wrote other examples because I blew through those first slides because we'd already talked about them so much that I figured maybe I'd throw out some other examples from my history And now that I'm standing in front of all of you, I can't think for the life of me of another example of something I want to tell you about. That's important, but that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. We'll just keep moving. No problems. What I do want you to know, and what I hope you take away, is just this one item. Just this one item. I swear, just this one item. I was not the 10x engineer, right? Like, I had the smartest people ever on my team, and they were incredible and amazing, and they would call me out on my crap all the time, and I'd be like, yep, you're super smart, and yes, you know exactly. Okay, they didn't know exactly what they were talking about, but they were on the right track, right? So they were at least heading in the right direction. And what I realized is that I don't have to be the 10x engineer. You know how they're always talking about, like, become the 10x engineer, hire the 10x engineer, do that kind of crap. Not crap. It's useful and good to have the 10x engineers. Don't get me wrong. But you don't have to be the 10x engineer. What I found my superpowers, and what hopefully you can all find within yourselves as your superpower, is enabling other people to be the 10x engineer. And it doesn't even have to be the 10x engineer, right? It could be the 2x engineer. It could be the 1.5x engineer. It could be whatever, the 14x engineer. But any incremental addition you can make to someone else's life is incredibly impactful. And those changes typically aren't done. Those changes typically aren't done with YAML or with code or with things of that nature. It's typically those concepts, right? It's typically, that proactive is better than reactive. It's the toil reduction. It's all those things. Like, I didn't have a picture of the Google book, but yeah, it's all those things in there, even if it was better on paper than it was in reality, it's all of those things. And it's super important that that's what you come away with from this talk. Like, the rest is just, nonsense from my history, pretty much. But if you can enable others to be, the 1.5, the 2x engineer, the better off you're going to be. And then there's a couple of resources that you should probably check out. The second one is a short blog post, which is really good. The first one is this really interesting book. And even if you don't read the book, the author of this puts up blog posts all the time with snippets from the book, or just takeaways, additional extra items, and they're super interesting. And I find them to be super useful. And they actually led to a lot of the concepts and a lot of the conversations that I wanted to have today within this talk. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Hiya. Yeah, really enjoyed that. Thanks for that. I just had a quick question. You mentioned at the start that you kind of had that imposter syndrome, that kind of thing. You said you spoke about it already. Was it? I know you listed some further reading there.
Oh,
is there something that we can?
So I gave a presentation at SREcon 2019, and there is a video up on YouTube that talks all about creating that first, being the first SRE and then creating a first SRE team and doing all of that kind of stuff. I don't know that I spoke much about imposter syndrome. I probably did because, I still have it. So probably a common topic for.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Other questions?
Come on, folks. Any question, I'll take them. Fire them at me. Ooh. Yes.
All right. Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Yeah, I enjoyed your talk. It's really funny. You're a funny person.
Ooh,
That's it.
thank
That's
you.
the comment.
I'll accept that. I will accept that.
But do you not get pints later on?
Well, I don't drink.
Some of us folks are going.
I don't drink. Oh, but that does remind me. Are there any vegans in the audience? Ah, too bad. I only ask that because.
My partner is. So.
Oh, well then maybe I can hook you up. I came from America and I brought like vegan Reese's peanut butter cups because they're like impossible to find, and I was going to share them with this other person who I thought was coming who was vegan, but they didn't. They had some other thing going on, and now I'm like, I got all these Reese's peanut butter cups. What am I going to do with them? Which is like the best problem to have, right? But I do appreciate your comment. Thank you. Ooh, we got a question up front.
Just a second.
If you find yourself in a large corporation that's multiple levels of dysfunctional mess, one of which is their approach to SRE for whatever reason.
Yep.
Do you have any advice on how to start getting out of that when the mess is kind of tied in bureaucracy and people problems rather than technical?
Yes. So the question was, what's the advice when you work for a big organization that's a dysfunctional mess? How do you get out of this? So in one of the talks we saw yesterday, someone was talking about building out their IDP, right? Their developer platform, their internal developer platform. And they said you have to start with a single team and you build everything around them. It's very similar in this case. So what you need to do is you need to find an internal champion. Someone maybe that's been in the organization longer than you, someone that has maybe more reach than you, somebody that knows more names than you know. And you partner with them and you promote SRE with them. And you can start small. You could start with any of those items on the list, toil reduction, SLOs, error budgets, or anything like that. And you use that as a person as your champion to spread the message, right? And you yourself have to be like willing to go out and like do the hard work as well, right? Like pounding on the doors and grinding the pavestone and all of that kind of stuff. But that's my suggestion is find that person and then spread the message from there.
All right. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.